In a garden in Warsaw, just across the street from a German barracks, there are 2 glass jars buried beneath an apple tree. Inside each one, rolled tight and sealed against the soil, are strips of tissue paper. On them are 2,500 names. Each name was a child. Each child had been smuggled out of the most heavily guarded ghetto in occupied Europe. And the woman who buried those names had done it while the Nazis were looking for her. The woman was called Irena Sendler. For 60 years, almost nobody remembered her. Irena was born in 1910 in a small town outside Warsaw, in a village that was half Jewish. Her father, Stanislav, was a doctor, not the kind who kept careful ledgers of who could pay and who couldn't, the kind who treated everyone, especially the poorest families in the village. He used to tell her that if someone is drowning, you don't ask if they can swim, you jump in and help. By the time Irena was 6 years old, she spoke fluent Yiddish. She grew up playing with Jewish children in the street, eating at their tables, learning their holidays. When her father died of typhus after refusing to abandon a Jewish patient during an outbreak, leaders from the Jewish community offered to pay for Irena's education. That was the world she grew up in. That was the lesson she carried with her. She studied literature in Warsaw and became a social worker. By 1939, she was 30 years old and working for the city's welfare department when German tanks rolled into Poland. Before there was an organization, before there was a network, before there was a plan, she started forging documents. She and a small group of colleagues created thousands of false identity papers for Jewish families. Names changed, addresses changed, entire histories invented from nothing. Then, in November 1940, the Nazis sealed the Warsaw Ghetto. 400,000 people were forced into a 16-block section of the city surrounded by walls. Every child Irena saw inside those walls was living on borrowed time. The official food ration was roughly 200 calories per day. Thousands were dying every month from starvation and disease. Corpses lay in the streets because families could not afford to bury them. Irena had a permit. Because she worked for the health department, she was authorized to enter the ghetto to inspect sanitary conditions during a typhus outbreak. The Nazis allowed this because they feared the disease would spread beyond the walls. Irena used that permit every single day, sometimes more than once. She carried food, medicine, and money hidden beneath her clothing. And she wore a Star of David armband on her sleeve so the people inside would know exactly why she was there. Years later, some of the children she met inside those walls would become names on the strips of tissue paper buried beneath that apple tree. In December 1942, Irena joined WWII, the underground council for aid to Jews operated by the Polish resistance. She became head of the children's division. The problem she faced was simple. The children inside the ghetto were going to die. Not might, were. Deportations to Treblinka had already begun. Every week, thousands were loaded onto trains. Parents faced a choice that cannot be described in ordinary language. They could keep their children with them and almost certainly watch them die. Or they could hand them to a stranger with no guarantees and no promise except a chance. Irena could not offer certainty. She could only offer that chance. Some families accepted immediately. Others could not. Some agreed and then changed their minds at the last moment. Irena understood. She always came back. Her network eventually grew to around 25 people. Together, they developed methods to move children beyond the walls. Infants were sedated and hidden beneath ambulance stretchers. Others were wrapped in bundles and carried out as packages. Small children were hidden inside potato sacks, toolboxes, trunks, and suitcases. Older children disguised themselves as workers and blended into labor columns, leaving the ghetto each morning. Some escaped through the sewers. Others used a tunnel beneath the courthouse. One method nearly failed. Irena trained a dog to ride in the back of a truck. When the truck approached a checkpoint and a hidden child made a sound, she signaled the dog to bark. The guard dogs would bark back. In the noise, the child disappeared. Every child who escaped received a new identity, a new name, a new history. Some were placed with foster families. Others were hidden in orphanages, convents, hospitals, and safe houses. And Irena wrote everything down. On thin strips of tissue paper, she recorded every child's real name, false name, and location. She knew that if the war ended, those children would need a way home. As the lists grew, keeping them became too dangerous. So she sealed them inside glass jars and buried them in the garden of a trusted neighbor. The garden sat directly across the street from a German military barracks. It was one of the last places anyone would think to search. By the time the operation was over, 2,500 names were hidden beneath that apple tree. In the early hours of October 20th, 1943, the Gestapo came for her. As soldiers climbed the stairs to her apartment, Irena threw a parcel through the window to a colleague waiting below. Inside were the latest names destined for the jars. Her colleague caught the parcel, hid it beneath her arm, and walked away. Moments later, the Gestapo kicked open the door. Irena Sendler was arrested. At Pawiak prison, they broke her feet. They broke her legs. For days, they demanded names, addresses, contacts, and locations. They wanted the children. They wanted everyone who had helped her. Irena told them nothing. Not one name, not one address, not one child. Eventually, she was sentenced to death by firing squad. Later, she said the sentence almost felt like relief. At least the fear would finally be over. But Segota was still working. Members of the resistance bribed a German guard. On the morning of her scheduled execution, as she was being led from the prison, the guard quietly told her to run. So she ran. The next day, posters appeared across Warsaw, listing the names of people who had been executed. Irena Sendler's name was on the list. She stood in the street and read her own death notice. Officially, she no longer existed. Using false papers and a new identity, she returned to resistance work and remained underground until the war ended. Then she went back to the garden. She dug up the jars, she unrolled the strips of tissue paper, and began trying to reconnect the children with whatever family might still be alive. In most cases, there was no family left. The parents who had handed their children to a stranger had been murdered in the camps. The children survived. Their parents did not. Irena carried that reality for the rest of her life. After the war, Poland's communist government persecuted many members of Segota. People who had risked everything were interrogated, imprisoned, and silenced. Irena rarely spoke publicly about what she had done. In 1965, she was recognized by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations. Outside Poland, almost nobody knew her name. Then, in 1999, a history teacher in Uniontown, Kansas, assigned a research project to 4 students. During their research, they found a single sentence claiming that a woman named Irena Sendler had saved 2,500 children from the Warsaw Ghetto. The students assumed it was a typo. No one person could possibly save that many children. They began researching to find the correct number. It wasn't a typo. 4 girls named Megan, Liz, Sabrina, and Jessica turned their research into a play called Life in a Jar. They performed it at their school, then at other schools, then around the world. More than 200 performances later, the story reached Warsaw. Eventually, it reached Irena herself. The girls traveled to Poland and met her. She was 89 years old, frail, walking with difficulty because of injuries inflicted in Pawiak prison more than half a century earlier. When they praised her for saving so many lives, she told them she wished she could have done more. In 2007, she was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. She did not win. She died the following year at the age of 98. Oskar Schindler saved approximately 1,100 people. His story became one of the most famous films ever made. Irena Sendler saved 2,500 children. For 60 years, almost nobody outside Poland knew her name. Until 4 teenagers in Kansas thought they had found a typo. It wasn't a typo. The names in those jars were real. The children were real. The lives were real. The jars survived. So did the children. And finally, so did her story.